We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome back to the Mankind Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Clift. The big C, as it's known, cancer. A word that holds so much weight, that holds so much fear, and that has impacted the lives of millions around the world. It's likely, if you're listening to this, that you yourself have someone in your sphere or in your immediate family that has been impacted by cancer, whether having it, whether caring for a loved one who has it. And it seems even though after hundreds of years of being aware of this sickness, many of us still are unarmed or ill-equipped to be able to handle the weight of it when it impacts our lives. I mean, who could possibly prepare for something to impact their family or their community's lives, such as cancer? I personally understand this myself, having lost my grandmother to cancer, and also my fiancée Christine having survived cancer herself. So how do we approach the emotions related to such a diagnosis? How do we approach supporting those who are going through and experiencing the effects of cancer and its various treatments? Well, I was introduced to a man named David Richman, who wrote a book called Cycle of Lives, 15 People's Stories, 5,000 Miles, and a Journey Through the Emotional Chaos of Cancer. And I wanted to bring him on to talk about his journey through losing his sister June to cancer, to then taking on a 5,000-mile bike ride around the United States to interview many people, caretakers, those that have survived cancer, those that have lost people very close to them. I wanted to bring him on to hear his perspective. And interestingly enough, he made it very clear that although the common theme or I guess topic surrounding these interviews and these stories is around cancer, this book isn't about cancer, nor is it about a book for people who are experiencing cancer. It's actually a book about developing emotions, right? Being able to bring emotions to the ground level and be able to process the trauma while experiencing chaos. So whether it is something like cancer or something like ALS or other diseases that have huge impacts on family and community units, it's important to be able to identify what tools are necessary. What does support look like? To even bring more potency to this conversation, I wanted to bring on our producer and editor, Michael J. Russer, to come and speak. You've heard his voice in our ads for our various trainings. So you've heard his voice before, but you may not have heard his story if you haven't heard his episode on the podcast where he came on to talk about intimacy in the face of impotency. Brief story on Michael, and you're going to hear his story, is that he is chemically impotent because of his treatments around his metastatic cancer. He's had it for a long time now, but he is choosing to keep up the fight and live. And in fact, you're going to hear him say it himself, life has never been more rich and fulfilling than it ever has since getting diagnosed with cancer. And just the zest he has for life. I believe his input to this conversation is going to give you the first person view of the cancer kind of journey, or at least one form of what it looks like, whereas David is going to give his third person account of having interviewed countless people from all sides of experiencing the impacts of cancer. So you are going to get a lot out of this. You're going to hear a lot of pauses as we kind of breathe in and absorb kind of perhaps some of the weight in these conversations, but we also bring a bunch of levity, a lot of laughs, and a lot of optimism. So I hope that you yourself can get a lot of value from this interview, and potentially it can help arm you with the tools, or those you love who are currently experiencing the impacts of cancer. So this has been one of my favorite interviews since starting the show, and I believe that you are going to get a ton of value out of this. Be sure to share this with anyone you believe will, could really use a listen like this and who could possibly use these tools themselves. But that's enough from me. I want to introduce you to David Richman and Michael Russer. Enjoy. G'day and welcome to another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than one way to be a man. I'm your host today, Brandon Clift, and I'm joined by author, ultra athlete, and Ironman, David Richman, who's going to be sharing his story with us and the story behind his book of Cycle of Lives, 15 people's stories, 5,000 miles, and a journey through the emotional chaos of cancer. It's a pleasure to have you, David. Mate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to talk to you guys, and let's get to it.
Yeah, and I'm also joined today by producer, editor of the show, Michael J. Russer, dear friend of mine. And you may remember Michael's episode where he joined us to talk about intimacy. But Michael, mate, it's a pleasure to have you here, especially with your personal experience in relation to what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, Brandon, it is a pleasure, and it's not often that I get to sit in this chair, and I'm very excited to be part of this and to hear more of David's stories and his perspective on the not just the cancer journey, but kind of the hero's journey, I think, in general, of what people need to go through or have gone through. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure, mate. And with a voice like yours, we have to have you involved more.
That's what I was exactly just thinking right now, Brandon. I need to talk like him.
Well, that's a great place to start, David. I mean, I want to get into a bit of your story to set the scene, but just from the jump for the people listening at home, your book is not just for people that have cancer, have experienced cancer, whether it's through others that they love or they've taken care of. This book, more than anything, is about the emotional journey with all of the above, any disease, any chronic illness, right? Any loss of a loved one. So I want to ask you first, before we get into your story, why is it important that you frame this book before people read it to know that it isn't just a book about cancer or for people who have experienced the impacts of cancer?
Sure. Well, the reason why I needed to do that is because we all have experienced varying levels of trauma in our adolescence and young adulthood, right? I have come to learn that one person's trauma is no worse than anyone else's. It's just theirs. It's not yours. And yeah, there's bad things that happen and worse things that happen to people. But honestly, I've never met anybody who hasn't experienced some level of trauma in their adolescent and young adulthood.
Sure.
And that trauma does give us some tools. It also provides limiters for our ability to kind of bring our inner, true, authentic, best self to later stage things in life that we're going through, difficulties that we're going through. And so I wanted to try to, and that often creates a place of isolation for people. So when we're going through something traumatic, we tend to push other people away, or we self-isolate, or, maybe because we don't want to bring them down, or we think they might abandon us, or, there's a million reasons why, but those are the results of the traumas that we went through earlier. And what I was trying to do with the book is to try to give people a guidebook that would help them understand a little bit more of the thought behind the idea that people are always going through something or have gone through something really difficult, and how can we gain a better insight into that so we can now have more, deeper, authentic, real, connective conversations with them about the emotional side of what they're going through. And so that was the genesis of it.
And what I've really enjoyed about the book is, well, first of all, I had a slight moment of hesitation when you sent me the book on Audible, because it's quite a meaty meaty book you have here. But my fears subsided really quickly once I got into it, because you've broken the book up into 15 different stories. Well, really 16, because when you think of like, this could be 2 books. It's your story, right? It's your story, and how you have processed your grief in losing your sister, June, and we'll get into that. But also the stories of others. So let's start off with a little bit of background into your story and your experience with loss and as it pertains to cancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you. And just a super quick point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I like books about one person and their story and overcoming, and it's inspirational, but it doesn't stick with me it might not stick with me when I don't like tiny little snippet stories, like, 2 paragraphs here or 1 page there. But give me a movie that has, 6 main characters, or give me a book that has, a dozen different storylines. I'm like, wow, I'm hitting it from so many different perspectives, and it really gives it a chance to sink in. So that's what I try to do with that book. But I guess boy, I don't even know really where to start. But the genesis of it really started when I, was in my late 30s. And I found myself at a ridiculously low spot in my life. I was married to an abusive alcoholic. I was overweight. I was a smoker. I wasn't athletic. I was completely stressed out in life. Was not living my best life. Had no kind of self-awareness or understanding of what self-awareness was, anything like that. And I found myself just, really, really desolate and desperate for a change. And I kind of heard the right words at the right time. And that was a friend of mine who, when he was hearing me complain about my lot in life and all my bad choices and everything, he just looked at me and he was like, dude, stop complaining. Not every dog needs to be pet, because all you do is pet dogs that have rabies. Like, and you get bit and then you scratch your head going, why did the dog bite me? He goes, why don't you do me a favor and look at the mirror and solve your problems, because you're the problem, dude. You're the one. And I went, that's a different way of thinking about it. So I heard that at a time when I really needed to hear it. And I also at that time kind of found a way out of the relationship that I was in, and a way to get me and my kids to safety. And at that same time, I also got a call from my sister letting me know that she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And kind of that was a pot of ingredients that kind of was the start for my personal transformation, and also putting it into perspective against what my sister was getting ready to go through, if that makes sense.
So yeah, really it was a convergence of multiple things, right? The external being, the ending of a relationship with your then wife, getting your kids to a better position, and then your sister culminating with, alongside your journey, right? Your work, identifying that things weren't working for you, perhaps gone from a place of trying to rescue and fix others, when in fact you were the one that needed to invest in yourself. So
yeah, I did, and just to explain a little more and make it, sorry for making this a little bit personal, but it took me till my late 30s till I understood that I needed to live for the guy in the mirror. And knowing that, like, that was kind of day one. There wasn't a specific day, but that was like day one of a journey of discovery and learning and leaning into trying to become my best self. And I don't think I could have done that as successfully or as with as much urgency and importance if it wasn't reflected against the fact that at the same time, the person who was, really, really closest to me, for my whole life, right, was now at that same time embarking upon a journey that would lead to her certain death. And so it's kind of like I had an extra sense of urgency, an extra sense of mission to make sure that I try to do the best that I could do on this journey of transformation and discovery. And so it made it so much more important for me to not fail at this, taking step one and wherever that would lead me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you share in the book that her end of life journey really synced with your beginning of life journey.
Yeah.
That it kind of signified some momentum, a real shift and a real change. You also shared that, you and your sister shared some trauma growing up, so that had you guys bonded and linked in a big way. So I have my current idea of what processing grief and loss looks like, just based on the loss that I've experienced. What was your process like when June passed?
With cancer especially, there is or can be one silver lining to the reality that we don't live forever. And the silver lining to that could be that there are oftentimes a window of time, weeks, months, even years, in which you now at least can form connections with the people that you love, repair relationships. There is the disease that you're dealing with, there's life that you're dealing with, but it's different than a sudden death or an accidental death or something like that, where there's so much more of a sense of quick loss, and I can't close the book on things, I can't tie things together. But with cancer, you oftentimes can have the ability to do that. And so how I grieved it was kind of like with Bobby's situation. If you want to talk about Bobby in the book, we can do that. Is that we had grieved her dying long before she had died.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We knew we could process the loss. We could process some of the emotion behind and some of the, just the tragedy behind what she was leaving behind with her husband and kids and family and friends and that type of stuff. And so we were able to reconcile a lot of those emotions. What I didn't know until many years later was that I needed to grieve the fact that the only person that knew me and experienced the same traumas as me as a kid was no longer around. And so I could only now, if I ever want to, which we occasionally do sometimes, if I ever wanted to wallow in my own pity of the traumas that I had as a kid, I got nobody to share that with, right? That's one thing about sibling death that is very unique, is that somebody, especially if you're close in age, and we were only about 16 months apart, somebody understands you at a totally different level, and that person that understood me at that level was gone. So I definitely needed to grieve the fact that now I was alone in the traumas that we experienced as kids.
Well, I tell you, not to compound the weight of what you're sharing, but as well, you shared in the book that her husband and his family processed this experience much different, right, than the needs that you were needing. It's like they kind of just disappeared out of the fold in the mix, and same with your family on your side. So I can only imagine how much that feeling of isolation, how strong that was. But what was the call to action? Because we know now that you've gone and you've cycled your bike 5,000 miles across the country. You've interviewed countless people to end up with 15 powerful stories that have ended up in this book. What was the call to action? What was the fire? Where was it lit? What was that inciting incident for you?
So the inciting incident for me, and what drew me to want to do this project, was I had on that day one of journey of transformation, I said, I'm going to put down cigarettes. I'm going to figure out who I am and who I could be. I'm going to start to eat healthy. I'm going to try to live longer. I'm going to go for a run. And I was really impressed with myself that I made it just under 2 minutes on my first run. I mean, just under 2 minutes, man. I was running 12-minute miles and I couldn't run 2 minutes. So I was in a really, really bad shape. But a few years into June's treatment, she was getting close to the end of her life, and by then, me physically, I'd done some Ironmans, I'd done some very long distance runs and some long bikes. I'd kind of turned into an athlete, and so near the end of her life, she said, "Listen, David, there's this event coming up where it's a 24-hour event where we put together a team, and everybody is out there to raise money and awareness and education and whatever. And I know I'm not feeling well, but I want to go sit out on a lawn chair and watch them for the whole 24 hours, root them on as they're walking around a track in my honor." And I said, "Well, geez, June, if you're as sick as you are and want to go do that, I'll go run the whole 24 hours.
Wow.
And we'll be there together." And so we made that commitment, and I'll never forget, Brandon, the last day of kind of quote unquote training that I did was I was up in Northern California. At that time I lived in Los Angeles, and I had driven up to Northern California the night before, woke up early to do a half Ironman. And after the half Ironman, drove back down, and I talked to June and on the way down. And I remember we got this thing coming up in a few weeks, and I got home, took a shower, put on new clothes, and went for a 10-mile midnight run. And I was like, oh man, like I was really committed to being there. And then 2 days before the event, she passed away. So she couldn't be there to watch the event. But I had to hold up my end of the bargain. So I was there for the whole 24 hours. And the inciting event that you asked about happened during that 24 hours, where I just kind of noticed that when it came to treatment, how do I navigate insurance? What kind of resources are available to me? How do I eat better? What are the signs that I need to be able? When it came around the tasks of cancer, people were open. They're ready to talk about it, ready to give advice, ready to take advice, ready to share things. It was just a whole different thought. But when it came to how do you feel about it, or the emotions, or when it came to remembering people who had passed, when it came to the whole emotional facets of this trauma of cancer, I noticed that everything was silent. Everybody was in their own world. Everybody was self-isolated, looking down, walking slower, right? Distancing from the other walkers. It was just crazy. And I thought to myself, I got to figure out why. Why is it that we have such a hard time talking about the emotional side of trauma? And that was the inciting event. Sorry for the long answer, but I wanted to give the right background for it.
You said, you really just hit a nail there. The tasks of cancer, we can talk about that, but the emotions surrounding it, I wonder how much of the motivation around sharing those tasks and steps is also a front to not talk about and go into those emotions. And Michael, I wanted to introduce you and your story now at this stage. Mate, take it away, because I feel like this is the perfect moment to really bring your story into the fold.
Yeah, well, as we talked about prior to going out live on the air, I ended a 26-year marriage when my youngest son, my only son, my youngest of the two, went off to college. My wife at the time and we decided that we would end the marriage 11 years before it happened. And we basically stayed roommates, and I stayed faithful to the marriage, but it was, I just threw myself into my work. I was an angry, just driven man. I put most of my effort into my work. I started in my late 40s to get involved in trail running, and the irony is I introduced a friend of mine into trail running, and he ended up becoming an ultra marathoner. A fairly celebrated one. He could smoke me. I mean, I hate this when you're on the trail and you're just trying to keep up, and he's having a conversation like he's just sitting with you. And so I didn't have the running chops he did, but I did do a lot of that, and it kept me pretty healthy, which is a good thing, because 2 months after the marriage ended, which was back in fall of 2011, I was diagnosed with the first of 3 cancers. And in my family, that usually is a death sentence, because I lost 5 other members of my immediate family to various forms of cancer. Yet, David, as I'm thinking through, the kind of cancer that my first cancer was prostate cancer, something that many men end up with. And it's nowhere near as deadly as brain cancer. And so my thought was, well, I knew my family history, but somehow, you know what? I'm just gonna pound through it, and we'll do whatever it takes. I'm in pretty good shape, and for the first few years that worked until then I got diagnosed with another cancer, and then another cancer, and the second cancer was chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL, which in and of itself is not necessarily terribly dangerous, but it compromises your immune system, and as a result, I almost died of full septic shock 5 years ago. In fact, it was on my life partner and I, the 5th anniversary date, October 9th, 2017. I was admitted to the Cottage Hospital ICU here in Santa Barbara, and doctor pats me on the leg. He says, "Good thing you came in, because if you waited another 24 hours, you'd be dead." And so that's when I lost a lot of muscle mass, and then because I am basically chemically castrated to fight the prostate cancer, makes it very difficult to build any kind of strength or stamina. So I had to adjust to that. Emotionally, I almost took a defiant approach to it. Not like I'm going to beat this. It's like it's an annoyance for me, and I'm just being honest. The cancer was an annoyance. I'm bigger than this cancer, and I'm just going to see where it goes, right? But it occurred to me that I am facing my mortality here, and so a year after this all happened, I met my life partner, and we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary on October 9th this coming year. And there was a point where I turned to her and I said, "Sweetie, I want to know what it's like to die. I want to know, because I just want to feel love when I look at you when I take my last breath. I don't want to feel fear." So that started our exploration, and Brandon, I'm taking you at your word on this about going in this direction.
Do it.
That started a very intensive journey in investigation using plant medicines, entheogens, and some psychedelics like ayahuasca, psilocybin, and the big daddy sapito or 5-MeO-DMT to literally experience ego death, and which is something I've experienced multiple times. And that has transformed my experience with mortality and facing mortality. I think cancer, the big C in my family, we tried never to talk about it because my mother was the first one to have it. She was the first one to die from it. Then my dad, my oldest brother, then my oldest sister, and then another brother all passed away from it. And so, and I have just 3 remaining sisters who will probably not get it because at their age, they're not likely to get it. But it scares them. And I'm no longer scared of it. It just is. And but those journeys really helped. And as a result, my partner and I have actually gone on the platform and talked to cancer survivors, many of them, on 2 things: how to regain intimacy in the face of cancer. And in my case, I was clinically impotent, so that was problematic in the minds of most men. But it actually opened up a world of intimacy we didn't even know existed. And then the idea of facing one's mortality head on. You're going to die, and probably before most of the people you know, is very liberating. And it allows Jacqueline and I, my partner and I, to experience, and it's going to sound like a cliche, but it's not for us, every moment as precious. Every moment. And so, yeah, there's limitations. You know, I'm not as physically strong by any means or have the endurance I used to have. Yet we still hike. We still dance every chance we get. We still take walks every night. We plunge in the ocean almost every day. And so we find alternatives. But the biggest shift for us was facing that mortality. And it happened with her too. And which at least gave us, I can only speak for us, gave us this tremendous appreciation for right here, right now, no matter what's going on. It is so sacred, so precious. And so in many ways, I'm the luckiest damn guy in the world because I get to experience this. If I hadn't had the cancers, I'd hate to think where I'd be, because I was not a great guy to be around prior to that. Yeah.
Wow, that's some powerful stuff there.
Yeah, so it's you know, and it's, I think ultimately, this is just my observation, that if you peel away the layers of most people's fears, it's the fear of, it's an existential fear. It's the existential fear of, regardless of the religious beliefs. My dad was staunch Catholic, and I knew on his dying bed he was scared. He went to Mass every day. He did everything you were supposed to do, and he was scared. I know that. And I think that the fear of death, the fear of potential non-existence, the elimination of this thing we call I, scares the crap out of most people, and especially in our culture. And what we have found is that when you face it head on, it is so liberating. In fact, one of the things that, one of my next projects that I want to do, it's not really a project, one of the next activities that I want to do is actually be with people in hospice who have no family. So they have somebody there that can be present for them when they pass.
That's a big goal. In fact, I there's a wonderful book, I forget the name of it because I read it many years ago, about a woman who was a hospice care worker and wrote about that, being there to witness and help guide and just hold the hands of, dozens and dozens and dozens of people who passed, and she wrote a little book about it, and it was a fascinating book. But I'll make it really, really simple, and that is that the human brain is just actually not wired to be able to contemplate our own mortality. It's just we don't have the ability to do that. What oftentimes psychedelics and other types of therapies can do is, even if temporarily, can rewire the brain to not only become at peace with it, but to actually understand it. And once you understand it, once you can wrap your brain around the fact that we are immortal, and I haven't done that yet. I haven't fully grasped that concept yet. But once you can, I think that what I've learned from talking to people is, once you do kind of rewire your brain to understand that, there's a level of peace with you and the world and the people around you that allows just a deeper level of connectivity and authenticity. And that is, that's a wonderful journey you've been able to take, at least, that facet of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was totally unexpected. Mm-hmm. And it started with the inquiry, is I want to know what it's like to die.
That's crazy. Mm-hmm. Well, I found the people in my book not through looking for, kind of remarkable stories about cancer. I found the people in my book I wanted them to have a wide range of perspectives. So age, when they encountered cancer, why they encountered cancer, like patient, loved one, doctor, whatever. But more than that, once I started talking to them, or immediately upon talking to them, I needed to find out and uncover, had they processed the emotional side of what they'd gone through? Had they not? Why? Can we quickly talk about that? And was there a compelling background of traumatic or, very seminal events that either showed them how they could connect on an emotional level with people later in life when they're going through something, or did it prevent them? And that's what I wanted to do. Point A is when you encounter cancer. Point B is today, how you are able to navigate or not able to navigate that emotional journey from A to B in relation to all the crap that happened before A. And in your case, if you didn't have that trauma of the last 11 years of a failed marriage, you wouldn't have been able to understand the value of having a great relationship, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Right. It's not reflective, but it does give it some perspective. And so what I wanted to do was to examine the trauma in such a way that it would let us better understand when I'm talking to someone like Michael. How do I better relate? What better questions can I ask? How can I better understand what he might have gone through in his life and how that might have affected his ability or inability to form deep and authentic connective relationships?
Yeah, I often tell Jacqueline, my partner, I says, as painful as it was, that marriage, we have the two children we have are both adults, very well adjusted and successful, and so we're very happy about that. And I have two brand new grandchildren, which I didn't think I'd be excited about, but oh my God, you can't stop me from interacting with them and just loving them to death. If it wasn't for that process and I didn't go through that, I'd still probably get the cancer and I'd probably be dead today, because I wouldn't have the tools or the insight to really deal with that. And so I've often said that if that was the price I had to pay to have the life that I've had for the last 10 years, then I'd gladly pay it. As painful as it was, and it was painful, I'd gladly pay it.
Well said.
There's a phenomenal experience in this room right now. This Zoom room, let's just call it, of Michael, your active journey and what you're going through, and I just love hearing that perspective. I remember before we met, I was told about you, and not many people had shared with me that you had cancer. And when I was informed that you had it before we had met, I felt the air in the room drop, and I felt like the weight, and I felt like the sensitivity in me rise. And then I meet you and you're like, hey, Brandon, nice to meet you, and just your bubbly, full of life self. It's, it's amazing to think about the identity that is formed around the big C. I mean, I know that when I met Christine, my fiance, when I met her, she was still in that 5-year period, right? She was still waiting for that 5-year mark to officially be out of to kind of snip it a little bit. And it was amazing how her identity was formed around her cancer, my cancer. And then when we got to that 5-year mark, it's amazing how the story around it, the identity around it, isn't playing as much of an active role in how she identifies herself. Now it's coming to mother, right, with a little one on the way in November, and it's making room for so many other things. But that's one thing I couldn't help but notice and identify was how much she identified with her cancer. And she, like you, Michael, said the exact same thing. She said she would never take away the experience. I mean, she is completely dependent on synthetic hormones for the rest of her life, if current medicine stays the way it is. And even with that burden, let's just say, no, the experience, I believe, and I said this to my parents when I met her, I said, Mum, Dad, I've never met someone so full of life. And she says, there's something about having it threatened to be taken away that puts things in perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point. How do we identify with what's going on with our life? And that's a choice. That is a choice. And I think for many people who face cancer for the first time, it's very easy to identify with the cancer. And it's like, yeah, I have cancer, right? And or I am a person with cancer. And I think partially because of my driven driven nature, and I tend to be very enthusiastic when not driven. I think I just thought, okay, it's like a freaking fly. I just get away from me. Just get away. And just, okay, I'll do the treatments and blah, 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 blah. And then, when the other cancers started piling on, I'm going, what the hell is going on here? What did I do in a previous life that somehow causes me to have this experience? But then the other two spontaneously went away, which is really weird. This one, not so much. This one has gotten very, very serious. But at the same time, I don't identify with it. It's a condition that affects my body. And that condition, while my awareness of it, my partner's awareness of it, and it affects her tremendously, by the way, because she is fully aware of the fact that there will be likely be a substantial part of her life without her partner. And we talk about that also all the time. And so this conversation about my mortality and its impact on both of us is fairly, we almost literally talk about it daily, but not in a down, kind of a, down or almost like funereal way. Not at all. It's like, okay, so, right, that's just the way it is, and let's make the best of it. And so, yeah, it's a choice, and it's a difficult choice to make, I think, for some people, but I think it's a choice that can be made. That you don't have to identify with the cancer. It is a condition, but it doesn't have to define you.
I hope you're enjoying the Mankind podcast. The Mankind Project supports all kinds of men with men's groups and programs aimed at building self-awareness, improving relationships, and upping your game. If you're willing to take the next step and you're a man of color, check out the men's work for BIPOC men. Find out more in the show notes.
Right. And Michael and Brandon, it's that way with other traumas, and that's what I wanted to try to explore in the book, right? Is some people live a certain way because of what's happening to them or what happened to them, or they live a certain way in spite of what happened to them. I probably was sparked into this like a little bit earlier than I mentioned to you, Brandon, because during the financial crisis, I was a manager at a large Wall Street firm. I was managing maybe $100 million in revenue, a couple hundred employees. And it was during the financial crisis, and one of our very beloved young family advisors took his own life. He jumped off the building, and it was absolutely horrific and tragic and the most horrible thing ever. And we couldn't get a trauma specialist in there quick enough, so I chose to walk around and talk to each person and just let them kind of give their emotional spiel on this. And I probably was, this was right around the time that my sister was going through her thing. So about a year after. So maybe it was a little more emotionally aware. And it was shocking, guys. Literally every single person I spoke to said, "Come here, close the door." And I did. And as we talked about it for a minute, they brought up a situation in their life where they had a first-person experience with somebody with suicide, a parent, a kid, a friend, a family friend. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know this about anybody. And imagine I knew many of these people very well, having been to funerals and weddings and barbecues and on vacations with them. And this little trauma, which was not little, it was major, I knew nothing about. I even had a situation when I was a kid, very first person with suicide, and it was boxed up. This trauma's boxed in. Now, we all we were in spite of those traumas, but we're all carrying around those traumas with us. And imagine the connectivity that we felt if even only for a short period of time, because we could now get a little bit about that inside voice that's trying to deal with this trauma, at least out for a moment. And so having somebody that understands you and is willing to go on this deep dive discovery about the things that you're going through or things that you went through is really, really wonderful. And you both are exceptionally fortunate to have or be the person or have somebody that is willing to go along that journey with you. It's really crazy.
Well, man, and that's what you're saying in my mind, and what's coming to me and is alive in me is that stigmas remain stigmas so long as we don't talk about them. Mm-hmm. What you did was present an opportunity for people to take those things that perhaps were put in a box and shoved in the attic of their minds and their hearts, and allowed them to bring it out. Hence the power of this conversation we're having right now. Hence the power of the conversations that are happening broadly right now around men's mental health. Geez, we didn't know just how much of a stigma there was. Me and Christine, we didn't know how much of a stigma there was around miscarriages until we went through our first pregnancy that didn't go to term. And when we reached out to seek support, overwhelming response came our way with people that we'd known our whole lives, and we had no idea they had been themselves, had experienced the impacts of a miscarriage. And I tell you, the grief experience for both of us was intense, but it was quick, right? It's not that it's gone, but I tell you what that did for us. When I met Christine back in 2015, if we had gone through that, I would have shut the doors, gone into my cave, tried to figure it out on my own, tried not to cry, tried to be a man, quotation marks, and not show weakness through my tears and sadness. Whereas with Christine, we grieved through it, surrounded by loved ones, with people that supported us, people that shared our experiences and shared our pain. That's why these conversations are so important. So I want to ask you, David, I want to ask you, Michael, how do we approach, or how does someone listening right now approach a conversation with someone who is experiencing trauma, whether it's related to cancer or not, whether they have it themselves, whether it's someone that they're close to that has it? How do we approach that conversation? Because how I initially approached the conversation with Michael was sensitive and hesitant based on my own ideas and experiences with cancer in my family, and right, where Michael was like, all right, let's just bring the energy up. So how do we approach those conversations knowing that every relationship is nuanced and situation is nuanced, of course?
Well, I'll give you the third person answer, and then Michael, you could give us the first person answer. A third person answer is in talking to everyone that I spoke to that eventually made it into the book, and then also the stories along the way of I did the bike ride, is that there are several things that are pretty much universal with everyone. One is, I don't want your puppy dog eyes. That doesn't help me. Number two is, don't need you to feel sorry for me because you had nothing to do with it, right? Don't tell me you're sorry, and don't feel sorry for me because you had nothing to do with it. The other thing is, I really don't want any level of sympathy, right? That's one. No, another one is, don't feel the need to compare. Like, don't. If we're gonna have an authentic talk about this, don't let me tell you about my cancer, and then you're gonna tell me about taking your dog to the vet and how hard that is, right? So comparisons don't work.
Right. So, and just a quick example, if I'm hearing you correctly, is in the same case, if I've got someone close to me experiencing cancer, that I compare my struggles and challenge and trauma with the person actually going through it, because that's such a common narrative for men. I need to be the rock, and I can't show any weakness right now because it's nowhere near as tough as what she's going through or what they're going through.
Right. I'm not saying don't engage in an authentic, open conversation. What I'm saying is don't compare. Like, oh, I'm sorry your grandmother died. Oh, you know what? I stubbed my toe today. I know how you feel, right? Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, we don't compare. Look, I learned that the fear of cancer is no less valid and has no less traumatic effect on someone than actually going through cancer. It's each person. I'm not judging what people are going through. I might have before. I might have, before I embarked on this project, not had an understanding that each person's trauma is real for them. The things that they've gone through, the things that they're going through are real for them. It needs no comparison. Like there's no scale of I've got it worse, you've got it worse, feel sorry for me, that kind of thing. So I'd say from a third person view, and what I've learned is those things, don't tell me sorry, don't puppy dog eye me. It's not your fault. You don't have to compare, right? I'm not looking to you for a solution. So don't come with trying to make me feel better. Just be there for me. And so that's the start of it. We can take it to step 2 in a minute, but I'd love to hear what Michael says first person.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation with my, I guess technically ex-sister-in-law. She lives just down the street, and we're friends. And she wanted to know what my latest latest circumstances was. And I told her I'm in chemo now, which is not good, not a good place to be for this kind of cancer. And she says, "Oh, you'll beat it. You'll beat it." And I'm thinking, well, I think you're projecting, but I didn't say that. And because for me, it's going to be whatever it's going to be. And I may beat it, and I may not beat it. And so and I don't run into that too often. What I've run into as a cancer survivor, which is really annoying, is everybody telling me about a new treatment that I should be trying, or new substance I should be taking, or something. And I've gotten to the point where I'm saying, "Hey, I so appreciate your concern, but let me tell you from a cancer survivor standpoint, we get so much of this that it really is not helpful. But I really appreciate your thought behind that, right?" And so I get that. And then there's an interesting situation here. My partner, Jacqueline, she experienced very severe trauma, sexual trauma as a child, and something. And she was raised in Paraguay in poverty, and so didn't have good health care. And she carried a couple of secrets that she never told her former husband of 10 years, and she was terrified of telling me, thinking I was going to abandon her if she did. And she shared them with me, and and obviously I did not abandon her. I felt extreme compassion towards her, given what she went through, and as a result, she is now helping others. First of all, just be willing to address it, because I think trauma. This is just from our own personal experience. Trauma will continue to wound on a daily, if not hour by hour basis, if you pretend it's not there, or you're not even aware it's there, but it's still there. A trauma that is addressed out in the open and in an appropriate container, I think has a much better chance of in a diminishing way of impacting you in a negative way. And so that's what we have found. And so she literally helps people who are interested in using, let's say, psychedelics or entheogens to address their trauma. And she shares her story and how, as a result of using those medicines, the medicine literally forced her to share them with me. And her ego was terrified. She thought she's going to lose me. And it did just the opposite. So that's been our perspective. And David, you're right. Everybody's got trauma. I mean, everybody's got a story. Everybody has something from their childhood or later. And so we are kind of unified in that way as a species. And so it's I think being able to talk about it and discuss it in an authentic and vulnerable way, but in a safe way, can go a long ways to help address that in terms of its impact in our lives. Because for many people, what we have seen is that trauma literally defines them. It defines their problems, it defines their frustrations, it defines their it gives them something to blame. Let's put it that way. It gives them something to blame. And what I have found is if I start blaming things, then I am disempowered to actually do something about it. And whereas I say, okay, this happened. Now what can I do about it to change it? That's much more, I found that to be much more empowering. So being able to talk about it, to discuss it in a safe container with somebody who can listen instead of prescribe, can be very, very, very helpful, I find.
And listening is the key point for those of us that want to form deeper connections with people that are going through something like that, right? Listening is the key. And that means not bringing a solution, not bringing ways to make it better, not bringing, because honestly, there's nothing we can do to make it better anyway, right? We're right. So it's not going to get better because we're going to try to make it better. So stop trying that. Just be there and listen. And rearrange the words and you get silent. So or the letters in listen is being silent, but listening is also asking the right questions. And I think that's the other thing that I learned, Brandon, was how to ask the right questions, because if you ask the right questions and you're silent and you listen, then it gives you ability to form a deeper connection. And I interviewed way more than 15 people, and sometimes I wasn't able to ask the right questions. Sometimes they weren't able to be open to me asking the right questions. And so many times we weren't able to go as deep as we needed to go. But when I knew that each participant was the right participant for this project was when we were in a place where I could ask the right questions and listen for their answers. And oftentimes I would get I've never really talked about that before. That was the key to say, this is the right person. We're on the right wavelength, because I'm asking the right questions and they're willing to talk about things they had never talked about before. That's going to give us the insight on how to better relate to people that are going through things that we just can't understand. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of with the book is all 15 stories are real. They're not anonymous, right? They're the real people. You could go look them up on right now on social media or the web. They're the real people, and they were willing to go to a place that they had never gone to before, in the hopes that it would help other people learn how to communicate with the people in their lives at a deeper, more connected, meaningful level. And that's the thing that I'm most proud of with the book.
Man, that's just beautiful. Just beautiful. Because it's so easy in those moments to assume, big C, you must be feeling this, right? And not knowing that you're just saying or asking someone that something they've just heard for the 1,000th time since getting diagnosed or finding out they have it, right?
Yeah, you haven't got to Kimberly's story yet, but when I first heard about Kimberly, I kind of called bullshit on the person that told me the story. And because I assumed, having had my sister going through brain cancer, I assumed that there's no way that what this woman was telling me about this her friend's story could be true. And what she told me was that her husband of 25 years had to wake her up and tell her that she was being wheeled into surgery to remove a grapefruit-sized tumor from her brain, that she might not make it out of surgery to see her 6 kids, and that she would, if she did make it out of surgery, she would most likely die shortly thereafter. And the wife looked up at him and cried tears of joy and said, "Thank God." Now, I called bullshit because there's no way that could happen, right? But knowing the backstory behind all of it, you completely understand and can totally sympathize and just be moved by that response. And it's there's no bullshit there. I mean, she was unbelievably grateful to have her husband tell her that, because the alternative, I don't want to ruin the story, but the alternative to what she thought was going on with her was worse. And so it just, each story to me gave a little exclamation point to that. Don't assume to know what somebody's going through, how they might feel about it, how big it is in their life, how little it is, how big it should be, how little it should be, what emotions they have. You know, I open up with each story with the pause, having the book participant tell me what's the most positive emotion regarding your cancer journey and what's the most negative, because I wanted them to tell me, because I have no idea. And the answers I got were ridiculous, right? Imagine gratitude. How many times have you mentioned gratitude, Michael? Who could ever think that you would be that grateful for the nonsense you've had to go through? But who am I to say how you should feel or assume how you do feel? That's the beauty of connecting with people on an authentic level.
So, David, I want to take a moment to cherry pick one of the subjects of your book, and it's the very first one. And I think out of all the stories, I mean, all of them are so phenomenal. But I believe Bobby's story right in the beginning does a great job of welcoming the listener or the reader into the purpose of the book, because you have this quite relatable character, I would judge, that, or someone I would, from my lens of coming from the Mankind Project and men's work, a very relatable character.
Yeah.
In Bobby. So could you give us just a brief overview of Bobby at the beginning of his story, and then we'll get into what.
Sure.
The rest of it.
So Bobby at the beginning of his story is a guy who is just out of his second failed marriage. His first marriage, his wife cheated on him with his best friend. Former best friend. Second marriage, she was not doing great things. And he was a culprit in both, because he was just an angry, distant, unconnected guy, easily prone to his, kind of his ego, his macho-ness. Not a bully, but just not a nice guy to be around. And I think he was frustrated with life, frustrated with himself. He was going through a terrible situation with work. He had started a very successful business, and he was forced into bankruptcy when the partnership dissolved. So he was just not having a good go of it. And so that was Bobby. And like a lot of people, problems were self-imposed mostly. He was just not connected to anything close to his best self.
One of the many aspects of what I love about your writing style and about the stories is you really get to know the characters. I mean, true to form, you said at the beginning of this, you want to watch a movie or read a book that has many character arcs. You want to see the development of each of the characters as they go through, and you really are presented with perhaps the hero of the story, but there's many supporting characters, and you've got his story about Brandy. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
I was assuming, okay, so Brandy is this new woman that he meets in his life. It comes in at possibly one of the worst times, right? Because he's not doing too well when he agrees to take on a date through a friend, right? It's kind of a blind date.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And so then I start going, oh, here we go. The story must be about Brandy, because she's the one who experiences the big C. But no, it's Bobby's story.
Yeah.
Of finally meeting the love of his life. And I remember, I knew it was coming, because I know what your book's about. I knew it was coming, and you're telling the story about Bobby and his love story with Brandy, and I'm getting so invested, and I'm like, mate, that's true love. That's true love, what they're having. Yeah. And then I knew it was coming, but I didn't want to, so I played naive, and ignorance is bliss. And of course, Brandy gets diagnosed and goes through her journey, and to see it come full circle, right, with Bobby meeting Brandy, falling in love. This is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. to then losing her. And then, so he finally, for the first time, understood what true love was, but to then come out the other side with finding love again. Like, how much can one person go through peaks and valleys, but to still come out the other side? It's
a great story, and thank you. It was really, I mean, it's tough to write real stories about real people when you're talking about things that they've never talked to anybody else about, right? And so pressing send when I finished the draft, and pressing send to each one of the book participants to say, hey, by the way, Michael, let me wrap up your whole failed marriage, your kids, your 5 losses of family members, you're meeting a partner and living your best. Here's 20 pages that represents you. What do you think? Freaking hard to do, man. Hard to do.
Yeah.
And with Bobby's, it was a little easier because we talked for a long time. I talked to Bobby for close to probably a year and a half to 2 years about his story. And what I found fascinating about it was what I really wanted to understand, I talked about it at the end of his story, but what I really wanted to understand is I asked him one time, I go, dude, so talk to me about like your best life. Because he had mentioned to me that Brandy gave him a new pair of glasses. That's what it was. Like now the world was fuzzy when I met Brandy. It was like putting on a new pair of glasses. Everything was clear, and I'm like, damn, how do you lose that? And then move on. And he said to me, he goes, dude, like I got to tell you something. Like there's no possible way in the world I could be any happier. I just couldn't. I'm living the best life I can imagine living. Now, if Brandy hadn't died, I would be married to Brandy. We would have kids. We would be living an incredible life, and it would have gone a totally different way for me. It would have been the most magical, beautiful, fantastic thing ever. He goes, but that didn't happen. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, to be able to say that with some kind of peace was just shocking to me. And it probably, having talked about this and thought about it for as many years as I have, it probably came in the fact that they had that opportunity when she knew she was going to die. They had the opportunity to kind of decide how they're going to come on the other side. How is he going to make it to the other side of that? And she said to him, look, dude, you got to go to therapy. You need it more than anybody. You got to promise me you'll go to therapy. And also, you are now the best person you're ever going to be. Ever. Don't keep that from somebody else. Don't not enjoy that. Go find someone that can enjoy that. Go be your best self. I'm kind of pissed because I'm not going to be the person that gets to enjoy that. But you're your best person and you need to be loved and you need to love. Go out there and find that. And it's like, whoa. I mean, yeah, that's not just in the movies. That stuff really does happen. And so how wonderful is it for his wife that he's now been married to for, it's got to be more than 10 years. How wonderful is it that she got to receive Bobby at the best Bobby? Forget, regardless of why he went through what he went through, but how wonderful for her that she got to receive the best Bobby and he got to be the best Bobby. That's what the story's about. Like how do you be your best self? And imagine, how do you be your best self having had 2 failed marriages, having been a macho bully, having not been at peace with the world, having lost the love of your life? How do you then become somebody who's living such a wonderful, fulfilled, beautiful life? That's what I wanted to find out. And that's what Bobby's story's about.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. It's not that different than yours in a way, right? You experienced the death of a marriage, but still, I mean, how do you come out the other side being your best self?
Yeah, a lot of work, and also we've had that conversation. You know, Jacqueline she's 13 years younger than me, and she's a beautiful woman. And I told her, I said, your wings are unfolding. You're blossoming. I fully expect you to live well without me. And I would not want anything else. I would not want anything else for you. And just choose wisely. And And it can be a hard conversation to have, because you're thinking, I'm talking about my replacement here, and there really is no replacement. That's the thing. Brandy is Brandy. She will always be Brandy in his mind, and is, I don't know anything about Bobby's current wife. I imagine she's an amazing, wonderful person, but she's not Brandy, and Brandy's not her. And so they're unique, and there'll be a special part in his heart and his life for them each. And I often tell Jacqueline, I says, I'm not going anywhere. I says, I will always be right here. And I point to her heart. I says, I will always be there. That you can count on. Mm-hmm. You know, and not like I have any special knowledge about what happens after we pass, but somehow I can make that statement with full conviction.
That's wonderful. Really wonderful.
Well, David, I want to ask you, what surprising impact, I mean surprising impact, has this whole journey with the interviewing all of these people and the cycling at 5,000 miles and the response and the people you've met along the way, what has been one of the surprising impacts of this journey that isn't in the book?
It's probably more personal, you know, to me. I think the impact that I wanted to have is really cool. I'll get notes from, you know, an oncologist. Hey, I've been an oncologist for 30 years. I never knew what my patients were going through. Thanks for writing this book. I'm like, damn, that's cool. But I hoped that would happen, right? I'll get like a note from somebody saying, you know, I really was able to form a deeper connectivity with a friend of mine that was going through something. You know, I really appreciated X, Y, Z, you know, this person's story because it really helped give me some insight. So that's what I expected. There were some not expected things, and just distance and time for me. I think I don't want to minimize it. It's deeper than saying I've been humbled. I've kind of been awed by I'm a very empathetic guy. I have a high level of observation. I can connect with people at a very deep level. I feel like I've always been that person. But I kind of am awed by the fact that even knowing that about me, I had no idea what the hell people were going through or what they've gone through. I just had no idea. You know, and I think I probably brought, even being sympathetic and empathetic and, you know, sensitive and connected to people, I still brought a kind of a narrower view because I thought I knew what people were going through. I thought I knew how they felt or who they were, what made them up or whatever. And I think I've been awed by the fact that, you know, the trite little saying of you never know what people are going through or what they have gone through. Like you can say it, but boy, I've really found out the true answer to that is you have no freaking idea what people are going through or what they have gone through. And it's not humbling. I'm more in awe about that thing because I'm shocked by it because I thought I knew. I had no clue. And that's it's nice to have been given that lesson and that perspective, you know?
Beautiful. Wow. Man. Well, the book, Cycle of Lives, 15 People's Stories, 5,000 Miles on a Journey Through the Emotional Chaos of Cancer. There are links in the show notes that you can get your hands on a copy. I chose the Audible approach, and the storytelling is just phenomenal. And the different narrators that you brought on.
How sweet is that?
It's so, I mean, what a luxury, right? It's not the same. It's not the same bloke trying to do the voice of a 6-year-old girl. It's, you know, it's all this, it's so varied in the difference. And the book has been such a treat, and it's been emotional going through it and listening to it. And, but what it's done for me in many ways is a lot of what we've covered today, just not knowing what someone's truly going through. It's helped me better understand how to approach those that are whom I want to support, but I want to do it in the right way. right? For them, not for me to try and support, but really what could they use or need from me without me projecting? So that's been powerful. It's brought me closer to Christine and understanding her journey through cancer, and it's helped me really tie a bow on our miscarriage. And so thank you, David. Thank you. And I know this book is having immense impact, and for those of you listening, this is a bedside read, I think, for many, I would assume.
Thanks. I definitely appreciate it. That's a great endorsement, great thoughts. I know the book is good, right? I know the stories are good because they're real. They're real stories. And I know that they're good because I had to get everybody's sign off on the fact that I could, because I didn't change very, very little names and facts changed, some for artistic licensing purposes, but really, so I know that it's good because it's real. It has those people's approval on it, and it goes super, super deep. But for you to say that is very nice. I definitely appreciate that. And the added benefit is I'm not making any money off of it. 100% of the proceeds go to the cancer organizations and other organizations that were chosen by the book participants. So those are listed in the book. They're listed on the website. And even though there's no freaking money in books, any money that comes in does go to the cancer and other organizations that were chosen by those book participants.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Well, before we do final comments, David, do you have another book in you?
Oh my gosh, I do. I've written some are related, like narrative nonfiction type books. I that's all I want to do. That's all I do is write. So the answer is very much yes. And I love doing it. The biggest problem is I always let everything else come up as a higher priority, like everybody else, right? I'm the exact. You know how they say you want to find out the writer on the block. Who's the writer on the block? It's the guy with the cleanest house because he wants to do everything but right.
Yeah. The prettiest garden. That's my.
He's got the prettiest garden, man. The writer's
mine.
got the prettiest garden. So no, I do have plenty more. So stay tuned, and I do update on things that are going on, on the website and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure having you join us, brother. It's been a pleasure to bring you to the in front of the camera.
In front of the
microphone rather than behind. So, brother, it's been amazing to delve deeper into your story and to have you share.
Thank you.
What final comments do you have for the listeners or us here?
Oh, you're asking me. I would first of all, I want to thank David for the work that you do, David. You shine a light on an area of life that so many people are affected by, whether it is cancer or some other trauma, and I think that is so important because then people can see themselves or people they know within those stories, those very powerful stories. I have not read the book, but I trust Brandon explicitly. So when he says they're really good stories and they really are have a huge impact, then I believe that. And so I want to acknowledge and thank you for the work that you do. And I wish you continued success. And in terms of the listeners thinking, being exposed to this work, I think that some of the big points that came out here is that everybody has trauma. Everybody. You can't go through this human experience without trauma. And so everybody has trauma. And I truly believe that trauma addressed is much less of a trauma in terms of its impact on one's life than one that is kept hidden out of fear of shame, out of fear of non-acceptance, out of fear of ostracization, that when it's addressed authentically and vulnerably and not being attached to how other people receive it. That's, I think, really important. So I've learned to not be attached on how people receive my thing. It's like you receive it the way you receive it. I will be as authentic and vulnerable as I need to be when I share it, but I will not be attached to how you receive it or how you respond to it. And that seems to open up a nice, safe space for people, because then they know I'm not judging them. They know I have no expectations of them. I am merely creating a space of being present for them. And it's up to them to either accept that invitation or not. And that's okay either way. But I think it's a good place to start.
Wonderful.
Beautiful. David, yourself, any final comments?
No, thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. I mean, we both know it sounds weird to, kind of be this, feeling good about sharing emotion and whatever, because we're all men, and all men are, kind of like wired to think like, I got to be the tough guy or whatever. But I mean, really, it isn't. It's just silly. That's silliness. I do appreciate the work that you guys do, that you're doing. I mean, we all are just little kids in big kid bodies, and we all just, want to be happy and safe, and, looking for the next thing that's wonderful that's going to happen, the next toy we can play with, the next place we're going to go. I mean, that's what, but we can only do that if we're authentic, and if we're real, and if we're grounded, and if we're connecting to like-minded people. And your efforts give people the freedom to say, yeah, I can do that without sounding like an idiot, and without feeling like an idiot. And it's kind of like, once you get to that side of being okay with it, you actually don't get softer. You get a ton more strong. And that's the myth, right?
Yeah.
If I go there, I'm going to turn soft, and it's the other way around. You go there, you get stronger, and you get more conviction in you, and you get more awareness and self-awareness. And it's a great place to be, and I know you bring a lot of people there with you, so keep it up.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And yeah, I mean, the joy that comes from this work, and the toys that come from this work. I mean, Michael can tell you with his motorcycle topping that thing out. Well,
a different kind of bike, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you, man. Thank you both for being here. You can find out more about David Richman. We'll have links to his website. You can book him for keynotes, you can book him for speeches, and find out about all of his writings. You can find him through the show notes. You can find also the link to the book, as well as his author profile, so you can follow and subscribe so that you're the first to know when his next material comes out. I want to thank those of you that join us each and every week. You turn up with an open ears and an open heart as well. And just gratitude to be able to get an opportunity to connect with people like David, with people like Michael, inspiring stories, inspiring men and women, and people that are just doing amazing stuff in the world. So a lot of gratitude going left and right. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. I dare say we did that today, gents. What do you say?
Definitely.
I would say so. Absolutely. Thanks, Brandon.
Pleasure. Lots of love. We'll see you all next week. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your hosts, Paul Newell, Boyson Hodgson, and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, we've got to give special thanks to our back-end team, producer, editor, and audio ninja for the show, Michael J. Russer, and Don Huff, who takes care of our graphics and promotions and pretty much makes us look pretty. So, of course, thank you, Don. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. What it means for Paul, what it means for Boyson, that is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.